May 7th, 1945. 2:41 in the morning, Reims, France. Inside a small red brick schoolhouse beneath fluorescent lights that hummed against the silence, a German general picked up a pen. He signed his name. And just like that, 6 years, tens of millions of lives, and the most destructive war in human history came to an official, legal end. But Dwight D. Eisenhower was not in that room. He had refused to be. To understand why, you have to go back 24 hours. You have to understand who walked through that door, what they represented, and what Eisenhower had seen with his own eyes in the weeks before that pen touched that paper. Because what happened inside that schoolhouse was not simply the end of a war. It was a verdict. Adolf Hitler died by suicide in his Berlin bunker on April the 30th, 1945. The Third Reich, the empire that was supposed to last 1,000 years, had lasted 12. Its cities were rubble. Its army was shattered across 2 collapsing fronts. And yet, in its final days, Germany's new leadership was still calculating, still maneuvering, still trying to salvage something from total ruin. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, name Hitler's designated successor, established a rump government in Flensburg near the Danish border. He had a plan. It was not honorable, but it was pragmatic, in the way that desperate men convince themselves that pragmatism is the same thing as dignity. Dönitz wanted to surrender to the Western Allies only. He wanted to continue fighting the Soviets in the East, bleeding the Red Army while funneling as many German soldiers and refugees westward as possible, out of Soviet reach. He believed the Americans and British might accept this arrangement. He believed the ideological fault lines of the emerging post-war world might be exploited even now, even at the moment of total defeat. He was wrong, but that didn't stop him from trying. On May 5th, Admiral Hans-Georg von Friedeberg arrived at Reims. He carried authority only for partial arrangements. He was a test envoy, a probe sent ahead to read the room, to see how much flexibility existed on the Allied side. He was met not by Eisenhower, but by Eisenhower's chief of staff, General Walter Bedell Smith. The message was immediate and unambiguous. There would be no partial surrender. There would be no phased arrangements allowing German forces to reposition westward. The Allies would accept nothing less than unconditional surrender on every front, simultaneously, with no negotiated exceptions. Friedeberg did not have the authority to sign such terms. He had not been sent to sign them. He sent word back to Flensburg. Dönitz hesitated. Then he sent Jodl. Colonel General Alfred Jodl was not a minor figure. He was not a bureaucrat or a diplomat dispatched at the last moment. He was the chief of operations of the German High Command. For 6 years, he had sat beside Hitler. He had planned campaigns. He had signed operational orders. He had been, in the most functional sense, the military brain behind the Wehrmacht's war machine. He arrived in Reims on May 6th with actual authority, and he arrived with the same intention. Friedeberg had carried out the following: delay, negotiate, buy time, and move men west. The war room where these negotiations took place had been a classroom. A ping-pong table had been pushed to the center and covered with green cloth, transformed into a conference table. Maps covered the walls. Jodl sat across from Allied officers and made his case. He proposed a phased surrender, a period of 48 hours during which German forces could begin organized disengagement before the formal capitulation took full effect. It was, on its surface, a military request. Underneath it, it was the same calculation Dönitz had been running for days. Eisenhower's response came through Bedell Smith, and it was delivered with the precision of a man who had learned exactly how much patience to give a defeated enemy. None. Eisenhower sent word directly to Jodl. If Germany did not sign unconditional, immediate, total surrender on all fronts, the Western lines would be sealed. No German soldier, no refugee, no civilian convoy. Nothing would pass westward through Allied lines. The men Jodl was trying to save would be left exactly where they stood. Jodl contacted Dönitz. At 1:30 in the morning on May 7th, authorization came back. Sign everything. At 2:41 a.m. in that former classroom, in that red brick schoolhouse, Alfred Jodl and Hans-Georg von Friedeburg signed the Act of Military Surrender on behalf of Germany. General Walter Bedell Smith signed for Eisenhower and the Allied Expeditionary Force. A French general and a Soviet general signed as witnesses. The document was unconditional. Every front, every command, every remaining German force on Earth, east, west, north, south, was ordered to cease operations by midnight on May 8th. It was done. And then Jodl made one final gesture. He asked to speak. He was permitted. He stood, and in German he said that the German people and the German military had been defeated, and that they could only hope that the victorious powers would treat them with generosity in the coming peace. The room was quiet when he finished. No one responded. After the signing, Jodl was brought to Eisenhower's private office. This was the moment. The Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, face to face with the man who had just signed the surrender of Nazi Germany. Eisenhower did not extend his hand. He stood behind his desk. He asked Jodl, through an interpreter, whether he fully understood the terms he had signed and whether he would be responsible for ensuring German compliance. Jodl said yes. Eisenhower dismissed him. That was all. No handshake, no formal exchange of courtesies, no gesture toward the rituals of soldierly respect that military tradition sometimes extends even to a defeated enemy. Nothing. People would ask about this later, whether it was protocol, whether it was personal, whether it was a statement intended for history. It was all three. Eisenhower had, just weeks before that morning, personally walked through the liberated concentration camps of Western Europe. He had ordered American soldiers to bear witness. He had ordered documentation, photographs, and records because he understood, with cold clarity, that future generations might one day claim it had never happened. He had seen what this war had been. Not a conflict between honorable adversaries, not a competition of strategies and armies that happened to cause collateral suffering. He had seen the deliberate, systematic machinery of mass murder. He had seen what the men who had run this war had done with their authority. Jodl was one of those men. Alfred Jodl had not been a reluctant participant. He had been a central architect. He had signed orders. He had directed operations. He had served the regime. And the regime had done what the world now knew it had done. A handshake is a gesture of recognition, of a certain human equality between two people standing in the same moment. Eisenhower made a decision that some would call cold, and others would call the only honest thing he could have done. He refused to pretend. The aftermath moved quickly, in the way that consequences always move once the moment of decision has passed. The surrender took effect on May 8th, 1945. The date entered history as Victory in Europe Day. Hans-Georg von Friedeburg, the man who had arrived first as a test envoy, who had watched negotiations fail and then watched his country surrender everything, committed suicide on May 23rd, 1945, 16 days after the war ended. Alfred Jodl was tried at the Nuremberg trials. He was found guilty of war crimes. On October the 16th, 1946, he was hanged. Dwight D. Eisenhower returned home. He was elected the 34th President of the United States. He served 2 terms. He never changed his account of what he had done in that office or why. After the signing, Eisenhower sent a message to the combined chiefs of staff. He had prepared something eloquent, something for the history books. But what he sent was a single sentence, simple, unadorned, precise. The mission of this Allied force is fulfilled. 11 words. For 6 years of the world breaking itself apart. For every decision made in every room that led to that schoolhouse in Reims. For every life spent to arrive at 2:41 in the morning on May 7th, 1945. 11 words, a refused handshake, a signed document, a dismissed German general. History does not always announce itself with ceremony. Sometimes it arrives in a former classroom, under fluorescent lights, with a pen set down on a green cloth table, and a supreme commander who chose, in the end, to let the truth of what had happened speak entirely for itself.